Greetings and salutations. My name is Michael Schwahn, and we're going to be talking about Infinity Nikki. Now, first, the Nikki franchise, or Infinity Nikki as well, is made by Paper Games, and they are based out of China. The Nikki series is a series that is focused on female-oriented mobile games, which the term female-oriented feels kind of like a bit of an antiquated terminology, but they are the people that made games like Love Nikki, Shiny Nikki, and a pretty significant number of other games. The Nikki series is a series of dress-up mobile gacha games, and from my understanding, they must have been pretty successful because they're still going. They're going to be expanding outside of mobile with Infinity Nikki, which is going to be available on PS4, PS5, also on mobile, and on PC. Now, this game has very clearly taken notes from Breath of the Wild, Genshin Impact, and there's also some influence of games like Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, and even Super Mario in there. Now, I'm here on a whim, as much of a pun as that is, and you'll see what I mean later. So, I make a whole lot of reaction videos, and someone was like, hey, you really need to check this game out. Nobody's talking about it. And that was the initial reveal trailer for Infinity Nikki. And I made a reaction to it, and we checked out a whole bunch of stuff that at least was available around the game and around the franchise. And it was this beautiful, magical looking game. And we watched this animation, and I cried, and I cried, and I cried because it was beautiful. And that video ended up being the second most watched video about Infinity Nikki, at least for a little while. Because really, nobody was talking about the game. And now people are talking about it now because it was at the most recent PlayStation State of Play, and that's wonderful. Because the game is nearing release. They just held a closed beta test, and there's going to be another beta test sometime in the fall around Q3, and then I think they're hopefully targeting a 2024 release, but there's not actually been a set date on that. Now, before we get into the game itself, I do need to give a disclaimer. I was directly contacted by Paper Games. They sent me an email, said, hey, we saw your video, we loved it, and we'd really like to invite you to this content creator beta program. Now, other people were invited too that weren't creators, but the content creator beta program gave you earlier access to the build, and you got some additional goodies. None of it's going to carry over into the game when it releases. Now, as a note, though, this video is in no way sponsored by Paper Games. There was no limitations on the tone of this video. All of the footage that is in this video was completely captured by me. Nothing was provided by Paper Games besides a actual bundle that had the game in it and access, and then a little bit of conversation between us. But otherwise, all of these opinions are my own and are no way influenced by Paper Games. So with that said, let's get started. So the very first thing I want to talk about is what is Infinity Nikki? We just kind of rolled on about that a little bit, about it being an open world adventure dress-up game. But a dress-up game? Come on. Now, I haven't personally researched this, but a lot of the comments from my last video about Infinity Nikki, or the first one, was kind of telling the story about what Infinity Nikki is and how it got started. Nikki started as a simple dress-up game where you're just trying to collect outfits and make little cute outfits and go into contests and win the contest based on how cute or sexy or glamorous or whatever you are. And it later evolved into a much more fantastic game where the story started to involve things like death and adventure and magic and craziness, which is very different from, hey, we're just a cute character that likes to put on dresses and shirts and whatever, right? And a lot of that still holds true in Infinity Nikki. Nikki finds a magical dress and is teleported to a magical land. She meets and releases a goddess who is then surrounded by dark and death and God knows what else, who sends her off to the world of Miraland to try to find the Wonder outfit and save the world. Now, one small note, though, is that I am not sure what we are saving the world from. It could be the little demon things, which are called Esselings, but otherwise, I don't actually know. I mean, at one point, I feel like Nikki's just like, I got freaking isekai'd into this world, and I just want to go home. But you know, I imagine more of that will be hopefully revealed as you get more into the story, because there are two sides of the story. There's, of course, the grand overarching scale of the story, and then the smaller, more localized events. But before we go any further, we need to talk about performance. So as a note, All of the footage here is completely unaltered. It is exactly as it is captured and exactly as it was played. And you're going to notice some things in that footage. So first, here are my system specs. I am running on Windows 11. My CPU is an AMD Ryzen 9 5900X. My GPU is an NVIDIA GeForce 3070 Ti. I have 64 gigabytes of RAM. We are playing the game on a 1440p display, trying to target 60 frames per second. In terms of graphics settings, everything was on max, although I did turn off motion blur. But I noticed playing with the settings that nothing seemed to change. I changed, the textures and everything down from ultra to medium or normal or whatever the setting was, and I couldn't notice any change, not in fidelity or performance. I don't know if the settings options just weren't working in this build or if they were so minimal that they were just completely unnoticeable. Now, as I was playing, my system load was approximately somewhere around 20 to 25% on my CPU, 10 to 12 gigabytes of RAM being used, and my GPU was around 50 to 85% of its utilization. And one thing I noticed is that those numbers did not change much across circumstances. It didn't matter if there was more or less enemies on the screen, if I was in town, if I was in the wild. If I was in a very small area, like inside a building that had its own loading area, that was generally a little bit lighter and ran smoother. But otherwise, it didn't seem to matter how much or how little was going on the screen. That is just kind of where my system load sat at all times. Now, this is a pretty decently heavy load on the system, but regardless of that, I still noticed a pretty decent number of performance stutters. The opening cutscene, the audio was completely out of sync on it, which I think can be attributed to some loading issues in general. Loading times were good, but I noticed that there was a significant amount of stutters in the game, and they weren't always consistent. A lot of them happened right when you loaded into something, when you loaded into an area, and they would smoothen out after running for a while. Now, this is an early build. The version was 0.7 point yada yada yada, and I think what this game really needed was it needed to cache its shaders, because that's what it definitely seemed like, is that it was loading in shaders or loading in textures, and it would just kind of hitch when it tried to do those things. And if it could actually have done a cached shader run, then we probably would have seen a lot of those performance issues go away, and I hope to see those types of things in a future build. There is a Q3 test in 2024, so hopefully when that test comes out, it's running a little bit better on PC. We'll also be able to see the PS4 and PS5 performance and maybe the mobile performance. I don't know if that Q3 test is going to be on mobile. I do believe it'll be on PS4 and PS5 because that's what was shown off in the PS4 PlayStation trailer, but on PC, at least, I think that I have a pretty, slightly above middle tier system. It ran pretty good most of the time, but there were some issues. Now, I will say I'm really not concerned about these performance issues, and you will see the issues. But I don't think that it's something that we can really say, oh, the game is just going to run like trash, because it's a really early build. A lot of the polish on games happens at the end of their development cycle. So regardless of what you see in the footage that I put up from this point further, I'm not going to be commenting on it anymore. That's what I noticed, or the reasons why, and what I hope to see when we get into the next part. Now, the game runs at a pretty heavy load, so what do you get? You get a genuinely beautiful game. A game that is filled with stunning and captivating visuals. The world of Mirrorland is really pleasing, although I will say that it doesn't stand out as something unique, but it also doesn't come across as something that is trying to stand out or be unique. It is a simple but absolutely lovely fantasy world. Now, one of the things we discussed during the last reaction video for Infinity Nikki was the target of focused visuals in a game's art style. This game isn't attempting to be hyper-realistic, but it is attempting to be consistent, and being consistent allows a game to be immersive, and I do believe that Infinity Nikki achieves that goal very, very well. This game feels halfway between a decent number of the aforementioned games, like an unrestricted Breath of the Wild that wasn't limited to the hardware of the Nintendo Switch, or a Genshin Impact that's trying to be a little less anime. Not that anime's bad, but a little less anime. But I will say that the world design feels a lot closer to Genshin than it does Breath of the Wild. Now, I mentioned that Mirrorland doesn't try to stand out, and I think one of the main reasons that this is because it allows the focus of your eyes to be on the star of the show, which is Nikki herself and her outfits. Now, Nikki is a beautiful model. She does a great job, although she is meant to be customized. Everything from her hair color to her eye color to eye effects to magical effects, everything on her outside of her body shape is meant to be changed. So a lot of the focus is done on what is changing on Nikki, and they have done some incredible work with visualizing some distinct textures within these outfits. It is really interesting to see within this really unique visual style how clearly you can see something that is lace versus denim versus satin versus like a bunch of sequins. And whatever shader they use, by the way, for the sparkle effect, it makes my brain light up like I just downed an entire pack of Fun Dip, okay? Because it's got this beautiful twinkling effect, and they have different levels of twinkle, at least it feels like they do, whether something is meant to be like sparkly glitter or just kind of twinkle like sequins or sparkle and dazzle like gems. And what all of these different textures and really like depths of effect and lighting effects that the clothing have, it makes you want to look at the clothing, which is, largely the point. It's a dress-up game. But it's also nice because there's such an impressively varied selection of clothing. You got everything from cute clothes, tomboyish clothes, gala clothes, gowns, casual, loungewear, active wear. There's a bunch of different options that were already in the game in this early build, and it kind of lets you just do whatever you want. Now, it makes sense, though, that the clothes, hair, and accessories would be of this impeccable quality. I already mentioned it's a dress-up game, but it's also going to be a gacha game, which means you're going to be gambling specifically on a lot of these outfits and accent effects. So in order for them to be worthy of you spending money on them, they need to be good. But we'll talk more about that whole gambling monetization stuff later. Now, I'm not going to talk much about the audio because there's just not much to talk about, okay? The music is fairly simple, but it's serviceable. It doesn't get repetitive or grating. It just kind of sits in the background and does exactly what you think. It's background music. The game does have voice acting, but it's only during cutscenes, and in this early build, there was only Chinese voiceover, which was fine. I didn't have any issue with it. It seemed good, but I don't speak any Chinese at all, so I couldn't tell you if the Chinese voice acting was good or bad. I could only tell like general emotion and inflection, and it seemed to be fine, and I hope the same can be said for the English VO when that is available, hopefully during the Q3 beta test. But it's really hard to say more than that right now. But what is Infinity Nikki about? Now, I mentioned a little bit of it when we first opened, and it's a little hard to say because we really have yet to have the full picture of what this story is going to be. But really, ultimately, it's fairly simple. It's nothing complex. It's straightforward and honestly entertaining. Like most of the rest of the game, it isn't trying to be more than it isn't. We got a bunch of fun characters with reasonable plot points, an understandable world, and serviceable lore, which is good because it doesn't treat you like you're stupid for not knowing things, and it also doesn't baby you with weird exposition dumps. One of my favorite franchises, Final Fantasy, is really, really bad about that, of doing one or the other, where they'll just have a bunch of completely made up words and you're completely lost trying to get through whatever the hell it is that the characters are talking about, or characters stand there and explain to you for 10 minutes all of the background of the world that you don't know so that you can follow along, and both of those options suck. They managed to keep the lore and the terminology and everything in Infinity Nikki simple enough that you can understand it without needing to go read the game's like inside dictionary Wikipedia articles so you have some concept of things, and it just presents itself and then rolls forward, which is great. Now, the star of the show, as I already said, is Nikki herself. Nikki is delightfully sweet and a bit entertaining when it comes to the level of carefree she is. We already talked about how she finds a dress because she's trying to find a dress for some sort of graduation, and she gets pulled into frickin' Narnia, finds a queen tied up in shadows and chains. No, not a queen, a goddess tied up in shadows and chains, and then is like, you must save the world, and then is sent off into another world. And she's like, well, that seems fine. It's like a normal Tuesday. And then she goes off and she makes friends extremely quickly. and then it's just hunky-dory, and we're off in this new magical adventure. And I don't know if the other Nikki games are all connected to one another. Like, maybe this is the 4th world she's been transported to, and it really is just a Tuesday for her. But for me, it's like, you're not even the slightest bit concerned. Okay, I'm the game. I mean, maybe you're just like, well, what else am I going to do? I'm going to go sew some clothes and be amazing. Sure, by all means. Now, there are some minor dialogue options when you're going through these story moments, which allows you to give a little bit more of a dynamic personality to Nikki. You can answer questions very straightforwardly, serious. Some of them are kind of sweet or ditzy or funny. And your friend Momo will normally call you out if you make the, quote, wrong response. But it's all in good fun, and it doesn't actually have any noticeable impact on the narrative, but it does give you a little bit of a freedom inside that narrative. One thing I will say, though, about that narrative is that compared to games like Genshin Impact, this game's narrative feels really, really nice. Mostly because characters in Infinity Nikki get to be characters without being advertisements. So every major character in most other gacha games, like Genshin Impact or Honkai Star Rail or whatever, those major characters are ads. That character, which is cool and unique and stuff, they're going to be on a banner, and the company wants you to spend money on them. The unique characters in Nikki, some of them have some specific designs. Like one of the early characters you meet, her name is Nonoi, and she has a pretty unique hairstyle that I don't see anyone else have, and I don't even know if you can get it. But outside of her hairstyle, nothing else about her is like trying to sell me anything, right? We're not going to be able to roll for Nonoi as a character later. Maybe her entire outfit will be something that we can get, but there's already so many really unique outfits that exist within the game that it would just be another option. It's not something that you need. It never feels like characters are being shown off for the sake of making money, so it allows these characters to get to be themselves. It also lets these characters feel more natural, and also allows characters to step in and out of the story or the spotlight as they need, which helps the narrative feel a lot more natural. Last thing I'll also say about the story is that it always feels very full of whimsy, which is appropriate because they talk about not whimsy. They never actually say the word whimsy, but they often talk about the power of whim, or the people that use whimmancy, like sorcery or pyromancy, but instead of either of those, it is whimmancy. I hope I'm saying that even closer right, but either way. And the game is definitely whimsical. And it really reminds me of like how, depending on your generation, you likely probably felt this same way as a kid when you read series like Harry Potter or Chronicles of Narnia, where there's just this unique air and energy about what you're being presented that just doesn't really exist in other formats unless you are presented that very unique situation. And something amazing about that is it is so incredibly relaxing to be in a world that feels so full of whimsy. Now, all that said, Infinity Nikki is a game, and so what is the game like? I'm going to break gameplay into 4 different parts, and that's story, adventure, combat, and dress up, and we're going to talk about them in that order. So, story. I don't want to talk a whole lot more about the story itself, but instead how that weighs into gameplay, because the story feeds a lot into the other 3 elements that we're going to talk about. You have to do a lot of exploration and adventure to gather resources to progress in certain parts of the story itself. There are unique dungeons with unique combat encounters that are tied to the story, and when you're going through the story, you're going to unlock outfits that have functions, such as literal gameplay elements. They have form because they're just really pleasant to look at, or sometimes even both. The story is a really strong foundation that the rest of the game is built on, which is a really good design philosophy because it makes us care about all aspects of the game. Which the next aspect we will talk about is adventure. So first off, it's an open world game, very similar to Genshin Impact or Breath of the Wild in terms of there's this big world, you can explore it and you can find stuff in it. And man, can you find stuff in it. There is lots to collect in this game. There is a currency, I'm going to call it the free currency, which is called blings. And they use some really interesting thing with blings, and we're kind of using them like a guiding stone, but I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to gameplay. There are a lot of crafting materials, and I mean a lot, and there's a lot of ways to get them. There's wonder outfits that have unique things like capturing bugs or washing animals or fishing. Those were the main ones that we saw in this build, but there is plenty of slots for there to be more of them. And there's also just resources that you can pick up on the ground or discover or whatever. There's also lots of waypoints that you can find, which kind of function kind of like the towers that are in Genshin Impact or like the towers in Breath of the Wild. You can like teleport between each one when you find them. There's quests that you can stumble upon. They're called Dew of Inspiration, and they're kind of similar to Korok seeds, especially in their actual functionality of as you collect more of them, you get some stuff for collecting more of them. It's kind of their only purpose. But then there's also Whim Stars, and Whim Stars are kind of like a combination of Breath of the Wild shrines and Korok seeds, or kind of like the Hydroculus and Geoculuses that exist within Genshin Impact. You use these to upgrade your skills and abilities and HP and stuff like that. Some of them are just sitting there. Some of them you'll see like up at the top of a tree and you're like, I'm not sure how to get up there. And so you got to look around and figure out how you're going to get up there. Some of them have an associated challenge with them. Some of them are also more obvious or less obvious. There is a way to scan for them, which helps you find them, and you'll get a little notification when one's nearby. So it's not very easy to miss them unless you just like walk past one and you're like, I'll go get it later, and then you forget to go back. But I also want to talk just a little bit about the challenges. One challenge in particular, because now I'll talk about two. One is there are ones that feel very, very similar to Breath of the Wild shrines. And these are neat. You walk through a mystical, magical door, and then there's some sort of challenge inside. Normally, it's a fairly simple puzzle. At least the ones that I got to experience were fairly simple. Not to say that they weren't challenging, but they were just simple mind puzzles. But again, very similar to Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom shrines. The other one that I also want to draw attention to is this particular star puzzle. So there's these ones that it's going to create this little zone, and you have to find the star. However, in the example that they give, the star is like painted on a wall with yellow chalk. They are not always painted on the wall with yellow chalk. Somewhere in that zone is a star. It can be the star on top of an umbrella, just a little piece of metal. It can be on a wheel. It can be hidden, and you have to find it in order to get the Whim Star. It's fun, and the very first time I came across this, I didn't understand that, and I was looking for way too long. And then in the other ones, it's like a freaking find me puzzle, and it's enjoyable and engaging enough. Now, however, all this said, there is one huge difference between Genshin Impact, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, and Infinity Nikki. Well, two, really, but they go hand in hand. One, you cannot climb in Infinity Nikki. You're not scaling walls. You're not doing any of that. There's a couple of ways to bounce yourself higher, or there's bounce pads around. If you need the opportunity to get higher, the game will present it to you, but you're not climbing. And on top of that, there is no stamina bar. And I cannot express how amazed I was at how big of a difference not having a stamina bar makes. Now, there is a glider, and you get it very early on. It's 2024. Games basically always have gliders and or grappling hooks now, but it's just a glider. You can just glide. You glide until you finally glide to the ground. But it's amazing how much more relaxed I feel not staring at this stupid little green circle slowly empty as I'm hoping I'm able to climb up to wherever I'm trying to get to. I can't express that, and I didn't realize until I played Infinity Nikki that was operating in the same realm as Genshin Impact and Tears of the Kingdom that I hate that little green circle so very, very much because it gives me anxiety that I don't want. And I never had that feeling in Infinity Nikki, and I really thank it for that. But you'll also see as we go through that a lot of things were designed with some of that idea in mind of trying to not be a frustrating experience without being overly simple. So, let's talk about combat. Now, with the combat, there's two sides to it: platforming and fighting. Now, normally you'd be like, platforming isn't really combat, which I would in some ways agree with you. But I put this in combat because some encounters are platforming. And we're not just talking about jumping puzzles, but platforming itself is the boss or is the challenge. Think of it more like a Super Mario game that you're just trying to jump into the right areas to make the thing happen. Now, one note, Nikki can't swim. I tested this. I was very surprised because what can you do in Genshin Impact and Breath of the Wild, all these other games that we've made endless comparisons to? You can freaking swim. You cannot swim in Infinity Nikki. And initially I thought this seemed silly until I gave myself an explanation for it, which was it's a dress-up game. You can't jump in the water. It would ruin your outfit. It would ruin your makeup or whatever, right? I was like, all right, I made my own explanation. I accept this and we'll move on. Now, that said, the game actually has really solid jumping controls. This whole entire closed beta was limited to mouse and keyboard. I did try plugging in a couple of different controllers. None of them worked. But I do imagine that if you had a controller, this game would be excellent to play with a controller. That said, with mouse and keyboard, it worked absolutely fine. It's a little bit clunky because you're using WASD to like move around, which isn't quite as smooth of a control as a joystick when it comes to platforming, but I honestly didn't have any trouble. I would say that I will question some of this a little bit more when it gets to a phone. Now, I mentioned earlier that I was going to talk about the blings being guiding stones. What did I mean by that? So this kind of blends back into adventure of that there are jumping puzzles and jumping encounters as you're exploring the world. And not all of them are obvious, but these blings are pretty abundant, and they will actually like be floating in an arc in the air, which gives you kind of this like telltale sign of like, I should be jumping through that arc in some way, whether from up above or down below. And it's a way that the game actually geniusly guides you to where it thinks you might want to go next, to either find a whim star or whatever else. It's really genius. I enjoyed it a lot. Some people will think it's probably a little too hand-holdy, and that's fine. I completely understand, but I found it enjoyable and engaging. Now, there is also combat in this game. They're called Esselings, but you're going to call them demons or shadows or baddies or whatever. You have an attack that's a purification orb, and it flies out from you. Now, here is the thing that I think will be the biggest debated piece about this game. More than its art direction, more than its monetization, more than gambling, more than story, anything else, I think this is going to be the singular most debated thing about this game. Nikki has an attack, only one attack, and it flies out from her and she attacks forward. And what I mean by that, her projectile goes the direction she is facing. It does not turn to attack the direction of the camera. If you are running to the right to evade an incoming projectile and you hit the attack button, Nikki is going to send her attack soaring off screen to the right, and you will likely hit nothing. There is a lock-on, but by default, Nikki does not just automatically send her attacks at the things that you have locked on. You can hold your attack button down, and then Nikki will charge her attack up and turn and look at what has been locked onto, which allows you to kind of circumvent. You can actually like strafe attack a little bit when you're doing that, but otherwise, you're going to have people that are going to be really frustrated because they're looking at an enemy, they run to the right, and their projectile soars off into nothing. I've already heard people talking about it that were in the closed beta test, and I'm like, it really wasn't that big a deal. But you need to think of Nikki like a cannon, and I mean like a Civil War or goes on a pirate ship cannon. The shot goes the direction the cannon is facing. Now, in some ways, you might think that this seems silly, but the limitation actually feeds a small air of strategy and difficulty that likely wouldn't exist otherwise. Because you need to get out of the way. A lot of the enemies have projectiles that they send at you or they're charging at you, so you are moving often. And there is a dodge ability, and it's really strong because through the entire animation of your dodge, you have iframes. You are invulnerable the entire time. You can have 5 projectiles coming at you, dash towards the projectiles, and as long as you are still in the dash animation as you collide with all 5 of them, they all fall off. It's one of the strongest dashes you will ever see in any game ever. But regardless of that, you're either using that to get out of the way or to literally headbutt danger, but that will still require yourself to be positioned to send the attack back. Because if you dodge to the left, you're going to now be facing to the left, which means you need to reposition to be facing forward to send the attack towards the enemy. This gives the game the smallest amount of skill. Now, the reason this is important is because the combat would be brain dead easy without it, as you can really honestly just kind of walk out of the way of most attacks. So positioning makes you work just that smallest bit more. Okay, there is not going to be people showcasing off insane, skill montages or parry breakdowns or whatever for this game. The combat is there, again, to be a service to the larger product. The combat itself is not the product. Now, through all this, I was definitely in the second category of people. I felt it was fine. I didn't have an issue with it, but I'm sure that it'll be a hotly debated point. Some people will hate it. I don't think anyone's gonna love it. I think you're gonna hate it, or you're gonna think that it's fine. Now, there are also some combat options. There is an AoE stomp, but that requires you to get up next to your enemies and then jump and then drop down on them, Mario style. There are penetrating attacks. Now, I doubt that most of these options are going to deepen the combat of the game much, but they were enjoyable and they give you options on how to approach encounters in your own style. If you want to stay back and just charge up the penetrating attacks because it'll go through the enemy's projectiles, or if they have a shield or something like that, or you can get up close to the group and AoE them, but you're probably not going to see any truly exceptional challenges in there. And outside of maybe if they feel like giving you a challenge, it's not like you're going to run into a difficulty wall of the combat based off of equipment, which means we need to talk about dressing up. Now, the origin of Nikki as a dress-up game was exactly that. There wasn't combat or adventure in the original games. It was just customize your character and enter into these contests with your cute dress and hope that you win. Now, what I meant by that statement about what you're wearing doesn't matter is that everything in the build we played, none of the dress-up outfit stuff affected any other element of the game. Literally at all. You would unlock outfits that had abilities to let you fish or whatever, but otherwise, that was all that they were. Your standard customizable outfit, what you're running around the world in, what you're going to see in cutscenes, what you're adventuring in, what you're in combat, it doesn't have any effect on those things. Your gear does have stats, but they're not combat stats, and we'll talk about what those are in just a moment, but those stats don't affect combat. You could run around in whatever getup you wanted. They are outfits only outside of the outfit mechanic, okay? And so that's why I say I don't think the combat's going to get a whole lot deeper. You're not going to need to, spend a bunch of money to get that special dress so that you have enough fire resist so that you don't get one shot by the latest boss or anything like that. That's not going to happen unless there was just a huge portion of this build that was missing, and I don't expect that to be the case. However, what are the outfits for? They are for style contests and monetization primarily. Now, style contests are essentially stat checks. Now, I mentioned earlier that while outfits do not have combat stats, they do have stats. They fall into 5 main attributes, which is elegant, fresh, sweet, sexy, handsome. And there are different contests based on each of those attributes. Now, you need a certain amount of a particular attribute and potentially multiple attributes when you get later in the game or with particular affixes on them to win. But really, the only ones that I saw were you just need to have a ton of elegant or a ton of sexy or whatever in order to win the contest. Now, I only remember one story-based style contest, and it was really easy to win with the default clothes. Now, there was a lot of other contests around town, and I did a decent number of them, but most of them didn't have rewards. Not that I noticed anyway. There was a bunch of them that I don't think I actually got anything at all for winning the contest, no matter how much I won by. Now, there was like an achievement for winning a certain number of contests, and that had a reward for it, but I don't actually think there was anything that I was getting for winning those contests. Now, that might change later on, because there was one side quest chain that had a handful of contests, and at the end, I did win a unique sketch for a piece of clothing to craft. But all of the other ones, I don't think that they meant anything. So I don't know if maybe that was absent or if that's just the way that it's supposed to be, but because of that, it really didn't appear that you had to engage much with this mechanic if you didn't want to, that it might just be there if you feel like doing a beauty pageant, I guess. But really, if it's necessary, that was fairly hidden. Now, this was a very early build, and the thing that this might drive, depending on the necessity of the style contest, will be the monetization, because in order to win these, you have to have a certain amount of stat, and better gear, of course, has better stats. A lot of the clothing that you find for free running around is 3-star clothing, and I'm sorry that you're immediately going to start to groan. There's 4-star clothing and 5-star clothing. That's CBA, S, double S, triple S tier when it comes to how much of those previously mentioned attributes they have. So let's talk about that monetization real quick before we get any more about the dressing up. Nikki, as a franchise, is a gacha game that started out on mobile. You gamble on clothing, you get better clothing for better stats that make it easier or maybe even potentially only possible to win particular style contests. High tier clothing is also more complex and generally a higher design quality. So you're getting fancier, cooler looking clothes with the higher rarity clothes that are going to be gambled on in a gacha system. Now there is a paid currency that I discovered. It is called diamonds. They were almost useless in this early build. I only found one use for them, which was to refill stamina. Now, if you've played a mobile game, you're like, oh, stamina system? What are the... I understand, but that said, this stamina system, unless there's other things you can do with it, was pretty light, okay? Because it wasn't like you could only run around for a certain amount of time based on stamina. There was these realms at the teleport towers that you could use to gain more resources, but gaining resources from those realms cost stamina. And we're talking about things like blings, the free currency, crafting mats, essence. There was a couple of combat challenges in there that gave you, again, like crafting rewards and stuff. So it was nothing that was like extreme and was probably just more helpful to help you get the things you needed rather than being something that's going to pressure you to buy the paid currency to refill your stamina. Now, there was no paid store in this build. My guess from other experience with gacha games is that the rate for diamonds is probably similarly poor to what it is in games like Genshin Impact for whatever the little stars are called. My brain just emptied on those, or whatever, right? I imagine it's probably around $28 for a 10 pulls worth of diamonds, but the paid gacha wasn't present. However, there was a gacha present. There was a gumball machine in the build that used the free currency, the blings, and it would just spit out pieces of clothing on you, and you just could engage with it if you wanted to. There was cool clothes in there. There was some accessories and stuff. Now, that said, the 5-star clothing, the rare clothing, the sketches that you can find and stuff like that, you can only craft them once, or if like the gacha, the rare stuff, you could only get it once. But the lower tier stuff, you could get multiple copies of. And I could not tell what the point of having multiple copies of something was at all. There was another type of, it's not a clothing, it's not even an accessory, it was called Eureka, and it was like a magical effect. You could have like this, you know, cute little familiar that's glowing floating around you, or like an effect on your hands or around your feet and stuff, and it had stats, and it was a way to boost your stats to hopefully be able to more easily win a style contest or to improve your customization, and you could upgrade those, and as you upgraded their Eureka, they would get like extra effects like additional creatures, or, you know, they'd glow brighter, or you could change their color. And I was like, okay, well, if you get multiple Eureka, you can make the Eureka better, but I found no way to make the clothing better, so I don't know what the point of having multiple copies of a piece of clothing is. I don't know, but you can only get multiple copies of low tier clothing, mostly ones that either pop out of the gacha or that you buy from the store. They might not have any use, and you can just have 28 of the same shirt for no reason. That said, you don't see it 28 times in the wardrobe either. The only way to know you have multiple copies of it is to like see it when you do a gacha pull, or to see how many of that thing you already own when you go to the store. So I don't know. That's all I got. Now, that said, I did get access to several, quote, like high tier outfits, and they were gorgeous. So I could also see people spending money on the monetization just for the purpose of aesthetics and cosmetics, because some of these outfits, I adored them, especially because they glittered. And I was like, it's so pretty. But again, it has no impact on exploration, adventure, or combat. I don't know if there's going to be a style contest barrier that might exist at some point in an attempt to force monetization, but there weren't any that I could perceive in this early build. However, again, monetization aside, the dress-up side of this game is actually something special, and it's something that only this game could really cultivate or accommodate. Now I'm going to ask you a question. How many hours have you spent in a character builder, in character creation? Pick your game. Baldur's Gate 3, Final Fantasy 14, Fallout, whatever. How long have you spent in those games designing your character? If your answer was more than 5 minutes, I have good news for you. Because when it comes to the dress-up side of this game, whether it is the style contest or just your own personal preference, this entire side of the game is just, what if we made a game out of a character creator, which is really cool. Because it's like you go to a style contest and they're like, hey, we're going to have a style contest and you need to pick the most handsome outfit you can. And sure, you could go in and sort your wardrobe by highest stats, highest handsome stats, and just drag them all onto Nikki and be like, I don't give a fuck what it looks like. These are all my best handsome clothes. And then just send it, right? But if you want to have a cohesive outfit, you now have this massive wardrobe of really beautiful clothes that are really excellently designed. You have tons of accessories, makeup, jewelry, contacts, magical effects that you get to customize yourself with. So if you enjoy that aspect of character creation and character customization, there is a very good chance that you will lose yourself to this aspect of the game fairly regularly, especially as you continue to purchase, craft, and find more clothing. There was plenty of times that I was running around and I would think, time to find a new outfit, especially after I had found like a new outfit or I had just seen a cutscene and I got to see Nikki in this like one outfit in a cutscene. I'm like, I want to be in a different outfit for the next cutscene. And you know, one thing though, when it comes to that, if I can make one request to the devs, please, 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 please let us save our own custom outfits. There were saved outfits for the special outfits, like the full sets. But if you were mixing and matching pieces from different outfits or pieces that you had found from chests or from quests or whatever, I couldn't save a setup. Not that I could find anyway. So if I can request anything, let me save some of my favorites. Like, I don't care if you want to limit it to like my favorite 10. I'm going to have more than that, and then I will just lament over having to only choose what my favorite 10 outfits were that weren't a special outfit. But please, please, please let me save my own custom outfits. There's a couple other nice to haves while we're on the topic of like requests. I know that body changes won't work because it'll mean that all the clothes would need to be refitted essentially. But skin tones, maybe that shouldn't affect clothing. You can even make it its own customization option of like different skin tones. I probably wouldn't recommend selling them for correctness reasons, but let us change Nikki's skin tone, please. You know, in this same logic, though, of like why we're not going to be able to change Nikki's body type because it would be very difficult on like adjusting the clothes. I'm pretty sure this is the same logic why we'll unfortunately probably never see a male option. Now, myself personally, I always 99.999% of the time choose the femme presenting option when it comes to video games. But admittedly, some of the clothes that the guys are wearing in this game is really sweet, and we're just never going to be able to wear them, and it wouldn't look the same on Nikki as it does some of the guys in the game. And I understand why we'll never see that, because it's going to be a completely separate model with a separate fit, and that's a lot of work, especially when the clothing is as highly detailed as it is. So that would be a really cool thing, but no. But absolutely, please let me save my own custom outfits and maybe consider a skin tone slider or color swatch selection at some point in the future. But regardless of those things, all aspects of this game's gameplay has a lot to offer across a lot of different areas. Now, some people have called Wuthering Waves the Genshin Impact for sweats or hardcores because it has a parry mechanic. I've also seen people now saying that Infinity Nikki is going to be the Genshin Impact for casuals. As people continue to try to find the Genshin Impact killer. If Overwatch has taught us anything, Genshin Impact will kill itself before anything else comes to kill it. But regardless of all that, I disagree. I don't feel like this is a different version of Genshin for a specific crowd. And unlike Wuthering Waves, it doesn't feel like it's targeting the Genshin crowd in the first place. It feels like the developers know what kind of game they wanted to make and were given the freedom to make it. They aren't copying Genshin Impact nearly as hard as games like Wuthering Waves or games like Breath of the Wild are being copied by Immortals Phoenix Rising. They have taken elements from those games and many others and used them as building blocks and pieces to create their own distinct product. This is a game that I wouldn't describe as for casuals. I've mentioned the word a couple of times through here. It's whimsical, but it's also cozy. You settle into this game and just feel comfortable. Infinity Nikki is something special because it is something genuinely different, without feeling like it's specifically trying to be different. This is a game that was not made to be beautiful. This is something beautiful that was made to be a game. The beauty in Infinity Nikki isn't meant to accent the entertainment. The beauty is the entertainment. I've probably said the words beautiful and lovely, stunning, radiant a few too many times in this video, and I don't regret that because there's not enough synonyms for those words to describe how this game feels. It's beautiful. And even this preview was a whimsical adventure that I enjoyed from the very beginning to the very end. Paper games made beauty fun, which makes Infinity Nikki something truly unique. So as we close out on the last little bits of this video, I just want to, extend another thank you to Paper Games for the opportunity to check out this early build of Infinity Nikki. I'm a really small creator, so opportunities like this will be something that I remember forever because it is something that I just don't have a lot of experience in or a lot of chance to be a part of otherwise. And I have a little bit of unique circumstance because I was lucky enough to have a video that got a lot of views on a very niche product, and I believe that's part of why I'm here. But I also hope that my perspective to people that are still watching this is a unique one. I don't have any experience in this franchise. I'm not somebody who is, moving from Genshin Impact to whatever the new free-to-play open-world gacha game is and just chasing the views that fit within my audience. This is something that is very unique to me and for me. And I tried to be as honest as I could throughout this video, and I hope that came across as clearly as possible. And I hope to be able to continue to do so as we move forward. So I do intend to continue to cover Infinity Nikki. If you can't tell from everything that I shared, I did really enjoy what I got to experience in the game. I've played not games like Infinity Nikki. I've never played a dress-up game before, but I've played plenty of open-world adventure games, several of which were free to play and several of which had gacha elements, which is why I had the opinions that I did. And whether that means that I'm able to get into the Q3 beta test or if that just means I'm waiting until release, I will definitely be around. I'll be giving Infinity Nikki a lot more of my time because it was, as I said earlier, something that was very relaxing. It was very cozy. It was comforting. And that's something that's difficult to find in a lot of games that aren't specifically trying to be, because there's plenty of cozy games out there, but you feel like they're trying to be cozy, whereas instead I felt myself getting comfortable in Infinity Nikki to where I had made myself cozy rather than being told that I would be cozy. If you enjoyed this video, please leave it a like. If you want to catch future videos of mine, they're not always like this one, but please consider subscribing to the channel. I also do stream over on Twitch. I'd appreciate if you'd follow me anywhere and everywhere. I'm also all across social media. Now, instead of the usual end screen, though, I do want to leave you with something a little bit different. There was a very beautiful piece of this game where I was like, this is something special. This is just meant to be beautiful. They made this just because. This little sequence was just pretty. It didn't have the purpose of trying to sell you anything. It was just, hey, take a moment with me, sit down, and enjoy it. And that's how I found it. And that's what I want to leave you with. So, whether I see you in a live stream or one of the other videos. Thank you, and enjoy.
好像梦境一样，真美呀。Blank sheet of paper, soft and easily crumbled. When the light shines through, it can never be, there's a hole. And it's not perfect, I know, but I'm gonna shape it still, till it is more